That was my understanding.
Anyway, just they have some.
I don't know.
Some cases.
Not how it actually being a part of the Fail. Hyperbole. Exaggeration.
That's a while enough.
Okay, let's get started. Let me have your attention, please. Let's get started. It's my privilege to welcome you to the University of Tennessee Nuclear Engineering Department Seminar Program. Today's speaker is Mrs. Anda Ray, who is the director of the TVA Public Power Institute. Anda received a bachelor's degree in nuclear physics from Auburn University and a master's degree in solid-state physics from Emory University. She has conducted research at AT&T in the area of lasers and fiber optics, and she began her TVA career in 1983. The topic of her presentation today is TVA Public Power Research Initiative. Anda, welcome.
Thank you. First, before I start, I want to introduce Ralph Burrows, and he's one of our primary nuclear project managers, program managers, knows everything about it. So if you have any questions, I'll go there. Actually, it's really interesting because several of you in this room are already or are planning on being something that I had a life dream of, which ever since I was a little kid, and that was to be a professor of nuclear physics at a major university. And I commend you for that. And although my career path didn't take me that way, I still have quite an affinity towards physics and a heart for nuclear physics, having worked in TVA's nuclear physics or nuclear area for 10 years. But where my career path took me, and what you're going to get a smattering of today, I guess whether you like it or not, because some of you have to be here, I understand, right? Is a little laughter there, yeah. Can I close this?
Yeah, sure.
I think that this particular area that I'm going to talk about in my career could probably be modeled, you could probably get an algorithm after Einstein's relativity. And that is, I'm knowing less and less and less about more and more and more till eventually I'll know nothing about everything. And I'm not there yet. That's why I'm here today, because I'm almost there, and that's why Dr. Dodd asked me. But what I would like to do is talk about all the types of research that's going on at TVA, and TVA as the largest generator of power in the United States, as the largest public power entity. And that makes a difference. And that's why you say, well, what's the difference between public power research initiatives and power research initiatives? And the difference is the focus. You know, that light you keep out there so you don't lose sight of your objectives. And that is, TVA was created to balance these three initiatives. They're actually a regional development agency, and if you read the TVA Act, you know, we're allowed to produce power if you happen to have any water left over from preventing floods. And what's happened as we supported economic development and environmental stewardship, the power obviously became the tail that's wagging the dog. And this is where we get most of the revenues. But the research for TVA is very focused at what's the public benefit. It's not, what do our stockholders get? There aren't any. It's not how do we maximize revenue? We're not for profit. It's not how do we get less money from the government? We don't get any money from the government anymore. And so it's very important for you to to figure out why in the world we're doing some of this research, to know that we have this kind of a focus. That focus is outlined in our TVA technology roadmap. Now, why do you have to have a roadmap? Remember that light to keep you focused on your objectives. If you'll notice, the first one is starting this competitive and reliable generation. Why? Well, because if you're not competitive, then you don't have any money to do all this good stuff. So we have to be competitive with the private, independently operated utilities. We have to be reliable. We've got to be the customer of choice, and that's why I'm really, really happy to see these TVA shirts here on your professors for advertising this, because we do need to stay competitive. But you notice a couple of other things. Improving the regional environmental quality. I mean, you don't see a lot of other companies doing that because, what, it's cost effective? Let me tell you, it's not. But that's TVA's mission. We are required by law to be the stewards of this area. You look at enabling wise and efficient use of electricity production. Well, excuse me, I mean, how many of you know companies that advertise to keep you from using their product? energy efficiency, turn your lights off, use compact fluorescence, recycle. How many companies do that? Well, that's because it's good for this area. And then obviously the reliability of the delivery system, which I think will be one of those areas that stays regulated. So the Public Power Institute TVA created a couple of years ago. That doesn't mean there's really a whole lot new, except that in research, which has been going on since 1933 at TVA, in fact, 60% of the world's fertilizer patents currently held by TVA. But what are we doing? I mean, moving into the new, what's an energy company doing with fertilizer patents? Well, that's another story for another time, but it does relate. But what they did is with the Public Power Institute say, okay, what are we doing research for? What's the focus? What are we trying to accomplish? And that's what they've pulled together in this thing called the Public Power Institute. It's headquartered in Muscle Shoals, Alabama for a variety of reasons, but the staff, of which all of you that are qualified, because you all are brilliant people, they get to live where they want to live. It's just the headquarters happen to be here, so we don't make anybody move. Now let's get down to brass tacks. You know, this is the part I have to deal with all the time. I don't get to do the real work anymore. This is an example of TVA's R&D money, and it was about $50 million at one time that was maxed, and that's for all the R&D that I showed you on that roadmap. What I want you to look at is, forget all this stuff down here, look at the top line. This shouldn't shock any of you. We all know that R&D money's going down. What we had to do, which you've been doing in the university system for a long, long time, is we had to go out and get external revenue. But here's the key. If all we did was provide research services for external people, then we're R&D for hire. I mean, you're not actually following a company goal or objective. So we've actually tapped off. We don't want to bring in much more external revenue than this compared to the internal amount of TVA funding. So we're leveraging. Now, what I really get irritated with when I go out and people say, oh, TVA, we want to partner with you. We want to leverage our R&D money. And they make it sound like it's something that I just, want to get married and we all get to go out and have a honeymoon. What that's code for is, oh, I want to partner with you. Give me your money. Oh, I want to leverage with you. Leverage your money with mine. Give me my money. Give me your money. And what happens is you want a real partnership where sometimes you give, sometimes you take. It's whoever has the best resources, and we have to leverage our money. None of us have a choice anymore. There's not enough for us all to do totally independent R&D. Now, let me look just at TVA R&D. Half of this $36 million, this is this year, will go to what we call the Electric Power Research Institute. I don't know if you're familiar. It's where about 98% of all the electric utilities in the United States are members, and they do collaborative research. You pool your money together. Nuclear is the most important of that area because nuclear research is very expensive. The nuclear research for existing assets shows up in this power production piece. This is the power delivery piece. This is TVA's core business, produce the power, deliver it. So obviously most of our R&D money goes towards improving existing assets. But look at this big piece down here on environmental. That continues to grow every year, as you read about President Bush's for pollutant policy. How do we reduce the environmental impact that TVA has on this region? We have one of the largest polluters with the coal plant. On the other hand, we have responsibility for environmental stewardship. So we're trying to reduce our footprint. This clean and advanced energy is what Ralph works in, and this is where our advanced nuclear would show up. Now, how do we carry out TVA's mandate to balance the three E's, the economy, the environment, and energy? How do you meet that technology roadmap that aligns with the mission of TVA? They set up PPI and said, let's focus. And things you're going to do, not to duplicate what you, academia, are doing or private industry is doing, because TVA cannot compete with private enterprise, are these three things. What's so important about a living laboratory? You guys have wonderful facilities here for laboratory facilities. But it's very different when you take a lab experiment and you raise it up to a bench scale or above a bench scale to a commercial type level. And that's what TVA is saying they're willing to do, is to use our existing assets, which have to continue to produce money, profit, and be competitive, and use them as a living laboratory. This example right here is of a fossil plant. This is a bunch of wood waste, and coke-fired wood waste. One of the first in the nation to coke-fire wood waste with coal. Has the same BTU content, costs less, reduces the emissions. The other one is to showcase beneficial technologies. You know, there's a lot of good research going on, but if nobody knows about it, it's a waste of money. And so one of the things we're doing is helping to showcase some of the good technologies that are out there, and I'll talk a little bit about a commercialization effort where we want to provide the opportunity for a vendor or private enterprise to actually get a good technology out there and being used. And then providing scientific input into public policy and regulation. This slide is something that I found actually really surprising. When the Public Power Institute was first formed, now remember all it did was bring and focus TVA's R&D that's been going on for years. The first thing that happened, especially at DOE and EPA, was, what, you're another entity that's going to try to siphon off some more money that's already not much of it around? I mean, what are you trying to do? You're going to duplicate our research? And there was a real hands-off kind of approach. Within 3 months, when they realized that we weren't going after appropriated funds, so we didn't compete with DOE and the labs and a lot of their contracts that they have with universities. And the vendors realized that we couldn't compete with private enterprise. We ended up filling a gap in the nation. Oops, I went too far, didn't I? That wasn't there. Or the gap that was there. What happens is we work with partnerships, and that's real partnerships, with universities, DOE labs, to take the new technologies, demonstrate them through PPI or through the partner, actually get them out there used on a commercial scale, and then deploy them, identify a commercialization partner that actually takes them out. This has been very effective, especially with ORNL, and I have several examples where I feel that was successful with them. Am I going the right way? Okay. I wanted to backtrack a little bit, because as someone who's in R&D, there's so many good ideas that you just want to follow up on. And it's very creative. And you have wonderful people that work in R&D, and they are very different from the rest of the people that work in a line organization. They have to be. In a line organization, you've got to follow procedures. You've got to be creative in how you solve problems. But in R&D, you've got to do technical due diligence. What else gets you the same results that may be totally not in any way, shape, or aligned with what you're working on? Therefore, we had to focus. I mean, all these things going on in the nation, but we had to focus. For instance, about 4 years ago, I headed up a TVA's distributed generation group. We were going to become the #1 distributed generation company in the world. Oops. Didn't really align with our core values. What it turned out was that TVA is the power distributor for this region. You have to maintain the lines, the power lines, the transmission distribution lines for this region. What we ended up doing was saying, how does distributed generation affect the power that goes to your house? All of you with 101 electronics know that electrons could care less what the contract path is, and if TVA has contracted with Southern Company for 500 megawatts of power, and we sell it to them and they pay us, and we send those electrons down the line, but some company over here all of a sudden decides to start up a plant, those electrons go to the demand. Southern never gets their power. So we've got contract people that work over here and people that are trying to track electrons and balance the system over here. And that's what distributed gen can do. Can you imagine if every single one of you had a distributed gen fuel cell, microturbine powering up your house, and all of a sudden it went down, you ran out of gas, whatever, and you have backup as the grid, and all of a sudden all of you are going to come on the grid at the same time? It ain't going to work. It'll pull the system down, it'll cause a voltage collapse, and everybody will lose their power. So we're really looking at the reliability of microturbines. In fact, this particular microturbine is powering up the Public Power Institute building. And we found that it's not just the technology, it's all the infrastructure that goes along making those technologies useful. I mean, this shuts off our lighting all the time because there's a safety switch in there. So that if there's a voltage surge, it shuts off so the poor lineman working on the line over here doesn't get a backbeat and gets himself electrocuted. Because they got to know, they think the line's off, but we've got our own generation over here. So this is a very interesting phenomena, and that's where TVA is focusing. Fast market followers. You can tell a marketing group came up with this one, right? It's technologies that are proven, but they're just now becoming commercial. So TVA is not out in the leadership role for developing the technology. They're in the leadership role for demonstrating commercialization. Things like the clean coal. Things like energy efficiency. We still have to make money, but we have to show people how not to use the product. This is where a lot of the nuclear plant energy efficiencies show up. Now, the market leader, It's all environmental because it ties with the effect that TVA has on the valley here, the visibility that you see sometimes on a cloudy day or a clear day and not. It comes with transformation technologies, things that I'll mention in a minute, like regenesis, which we think has the potential to change the electric industry in the United States, and power delivery, which we think will stay regulated. Okay, we have 6 major research focus areas. I'm going to go through each of them briefly. Again, you're seeing the broad scope of what TVA is looking at, and we have to decide how deep to go in each of these areas, how much funding to provide in each of these areas. I'll go briefly and show you a couple of the year 2002 R&D projects in those areas. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on environmental impact. 1/3 of the NOx emissions in this area is caused by your vehicles, my vehicles, what we drive. 1/3 is from TVA fossil plants, and the other 1/3 is miscellaneous. So we have a 30% impact on the environment. Something that is very interesting is that even though TVA has reduced its SOx and NOx by almost 78% in the past 10 years, visibility hasn't improved. So that tells you that some of the things that we do to the environment, it took 50, 60, 70 years to get there, it's going to take you 50, 60, 70 years to clean it up. So there is a lot of work going on why isn't there a direct relationship, a real-time relationship in reducing emissions and an increase in visibility or a reduction in ozone? These are a couple of examples. Carbon sequestration is very big in the nation today, and it's big for not just technology reasons. It's big for economics. Economics drives the world. The farmers are one of the most depressed industries in the United States. They see this as an opportunity to develop a cash crop for energy, where they could use it for biomass and bioburn, a cash crop that I will absorb carbon dioxide through my crops. So there's a lot of the Agriculture Department, the EPA, and DOE all have a lot of interest in the carbon sequestration. We were number one choice for DOE in receiving their contracts for carbon sequestration. TVA has an awful lot of extraterrestrial capture and sequestration. What we're looking at are tree planting, but really measuring it. Because if you plant the trees and you cut them down, then you don't get to count the CO2 anymore. If you burn them, you just release the CO2 back in the air. So you can't give somebody money and then they cut it down and then lose that effect. Looking at algae systems where we use solar panels to grow algae with carbon dioxide. The mercury capture, I won't get into a lot into that, but the mercury capture one is an area that's become very, very big. It's a frightening thing. You remember, what is it? It was Davy Crockett, and they called it, I think they call it Mad Hatter's disease. Well, some of the things they used to skin the raccoon skins was mercury, and so when people would wear those raccoon hats, they would get mercury poisoning, and they would go crazy. So people that's the view of mercury and what it can do. Our fossil plants emit mercury, so we have a lot of activity going on into, is it absorbed? What's the cycle for mercury? Elemental mercury is not a problem to you. The other kind of mercury is. How much of it is actually absorbed in some of our pollution control systems? We don't know. And President Bush just announced that he is now going to regulate mercury as of, 3 days ago? And in fine particulates is the visibility issue. Okay, here's one that's really interesting. If TVA, through its low power rates, brings industry into the valley to increase the economic development in this area, that's 2 of the 3 E's. But those industries that come in don't have the same affection or propensity to protect the environment that TVA is charged to do. What have we done? So we have an entire area that focuses on industrial ecology. How do we help industries in the area reduce their raw products, reduce their waste streams, produce their product in a more environmentally friendly manner, and carry on that stewardship role to these companies that are coming in? And then the other one is the energy use. This group has been extremely creative. I put a Habitat for Humanity picture up here. Why? What do you get when you burn anything? Ash. Coal plants produce coal ash. So we sell those to to a new process with Babb Lumber that happens to be just here in North Georgia. They produce a thing called autoclaved concrete, which is a concrete block. You couldn't tell the difference from looking at it, except that I can hold it up with 2 fingers, and it has insulation properties that concrete doesn't have. We're building a Habitat for Humanity house with Oak Ridge National Lab, putting all high energy efficiency equipment, appliances, and using the fly ash from the Bull Run fossil plant to build homes. I think that's really, really creative. This project, the hybrid lighting and distributed generation project, is fascinating. This is where it's really important sometimes to get out of our silos and look across several different disciplines. In this project, again with Oak Ridge, you're taking sunlight, which it's all proven that we all operate more effectively, more efficiently in natural lighting. So they take the sunlight and they split up the IR, the infrared, and they put it into photovoltaic cells to create energy. They take the visible light and put it through huge fiber optic conductors that come into the fluorescent light fixtures just like this, right next to a fluorescent light. So what's the challenge? Well, if you've ever been outside and the cloud kind of comes overhead, would you like to be sitting here studying at your desk and all of a sudden it's like light, dark, light, dark, light, dark? I mean, that's a little annoying. So the technology is to come up with a balance that balances between the electrical compact fluorescent or fluorescent light and the natural lighting, and keep it so that you sitting in your desk wouldn't notice any difference. At night, you use the photovoltaic energy that was stored to light the fluorescent part of the light. I think that this could actually change the way we do building lighting throughout the nation. Well, I think I'll mention this one down here, ultracapacitor. I mention it because this was the technology. Ultracapacitor has to do with storing energy for seconds to provide ride-through capability in the event of a voltage fluctuation, the things that make your microwave blink on and off. Ultracapacitor technology came from Russia during the Cold War. This came from the devices that they were using to detonate Star Wars devices. It was quick, high-pulse energy. So after the Cold War, this is a technology that actually came over to the State Department, and they're working with TVA and PAC, which is over near Oak Ridge, to work on this. And this will help us with ride-through capability for some voltage fluctuations. The power delivery, grid operations, that's what I talked about before. The electron doesn't care which way the contract path goes. They're going to go whichever way they want. So this is looking at these diamond diodes and triodes, which we're working with Vanderbilt University, which will, remember, you all are too young, but we used to have tubes. And then we went to solid state when I was working at Bell Labs. And now we're looking at going to these diamond, chemical vapor diamond deposition diodes and triodes for very quick switching to prevent. You have to have that in combined with the ultracapacitors, the switches with the ultracapacitance storage. Power marketing, I mentioned to a couple people. Remember when you had, what class was it? It's probably Algebra 2, when you actually had that little complex number I, and the square root of I was actually a negative number, and you're going, ooh, you can't have a square root of a negative number, but I let you do that? That's the reactive power during some of our when you transmit power, there's several different components, and one of them is reactive power. We have to have that to operate and balance the system. That's part of what ancillary services, you can't buy it. When we say cents per kilowatt hour, that's the stuff that turns your CD player and your refrigerator on. We don't have values for ancillary services. How much is it worth to have spinning reserves? How much is it worth to have some load following, to have the reactive power, to have a hedge for the future? We do a lot of financial trading. We don't know that, so there's a lot of work we're doing in the modeling area for this particular activity. And then transmission performance itself. Your computer runs on DC. We transmit to AC. We produce DC. I mean, we've gone back and forth, AC, DC, AC, DC, AC, DC. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just avoid all those transition costs and just give you exactly what your motors and your computers needed? We're looking at the transformer oil. I think there's one project I'll show you a little bit later on, which is looking at transformer oils and using biomass for transformer oil. I already talked about most of those. Power production technologies, this is where we look at improving our existing assets. And nuclear is one of those. You can see that what's in here are incremental improvements to nuclear, fossil, and hydropower. Those aren't breakthrough technologies, but they're what we have to keep the business running and operational. I think one of them that's interesting, I'll focus on the nuclear one, this resin in the water. It's a water-based polymer that actually has little pores in it, very porous, and as it goes through the water, particles stick to this porous resin, and therefore those particles that would normally plate out later on, they actually are stuck to this resin, and we can take them out and they're much more controlled. So it helps us reduce our radiation doses. This is where the advanced nuclear shows up, is in our clean and advanced energy. This is where we're looking at cleaner coal technologies. Seems like an oxymoron sometimes, doesn't it? But there are some where you actually break the coal components down into its chemicals, and you sell the chemicals. You use the BTU content for gas. It's called coal gasification. We also are looking at advanced power cycles using different liquids for heat convection. So we're looking at combined heat and power with something different than just steam. And then the Generation 4 nuclear technologies, which I think there's a better summary. I told Dr. Dodd, you actually participated in the early stages of this, but this came out a couple months ago. It's a roadmap to deploy new nuclear power plants in the United States. It's an excellent summary of where the power plant situation in the U.S. stands. It gives you an excellent summary of all the technology. There's 4 copies there. They have CDs, so I'm sure that they're not copyrighted. You can probably copy them since it came from DOE. What's interesting is that out of the 103 operating units, nuclear units in the United States, TVA was number 103 with the Watts Bar plant, and we really hope, if the economics turn out right, that Brownsbury 1 will be operating, maybe 104 operating. So we're definitely dedicated to the nuclear power industry. As far as Generation 4, I think Dr. Dodd and Ralph and others have worked, TVA is looking at the IRIS. We looked at the Pebble Fed reactor with Exxon in South Africa. I'm not sure if the demand is there for TVA to have the finances or the demand to build an entire nuclear power plant, but we have to be poised in case we're ready. But we're not looking at Generation 3. We are looking at 4. I already talked about distributed resources, where I want to focus on energy storage for a second. Talk about those. This plant right here is being built in Columbus, Mississippi. It's called Regenesis. It's the second of a kind in its world, and the first one's not built. The first one's being built in Little Barford in the United Kingdom. This one is an energy storage device, not like what I showed you before, which was ultracapacitors, seconds and microseconds of ride-through. This one's hours, days, weeks, months of ride-through. This uses 2 chemical storage. It's like a big car battery, except there's no metal anode. They're both liquid and use sodium bromide. This is about the size of 2 football fields is the footprint, and what it does is it stores energy in a chemical form and keeps it there until you need it. This particular plant at 12 megawatts can provide a total of 12 megawatts for up to 10 hours. You want 1 megawatt, you get 12 times that. It can provide the ancillary services. It can provide hedging for power marketing, where you actually use this to say, I have the power already stored. It can change the way we do electricity, because as you know, electricity is a perishable commodity. You can't store it. Can now, maybe. So this is a $30 million R&D project, and we don't get money that big very often to do these projects. These are our TVA nuclear-related projects. I mentioned before that over half of our nuclear funding goes to the Electric Power Research Institute. We do collaborate with them. They sometimes send the money back for us to do the research with partners. You can see that the EPRI portfolio is bigger issues, and there are specific projects under each of those. We look at all we have BWRs and PWR plans, but we look at the decommissioning activity. Although we're not planning on doing any of that anytime soon, we do look at this to try to extend the life of our plants, and obviously it's not necessarily the nuclear reactor, it's all the concrete growth issues. I don't want to go through each of those. I think you can see it. One that's very important is the human interface and training. I mean, there's so much required of someone who works in a nuclear plant to keep track and to keep up on their training. I mean, that's not even aside from the technology. And I think you all have participated. Several universities help TVA in this training. But it's looking at automated online training, kind of like, your video games, where the person can actually say, okay, I'm gonna take this valve and twist it here and do this mechanism, and they can see what happens if they've done it correctly or wrong. But it's kind of an interactive video training. I've already talked about the support of the Generation 4 plant for nuclear. And then our existing ones, these are existing plant improvements. Probably, let me see. I talked about the resin one. There's the gamma scan. For PWR, we inject zinc to reduce the gamma radiation. And so how can we inject as much zinc as we can, keep the efficiency of the system up, and reduce our dose exposure? So this is really kind of a modeling of zinc injection quantities into our coolant system. Okay, and the rest of them, what I think is interesting, they're operational, aren't they? They're so operational. Harmonic balancing for rotating equipment is to reduce vibration on piping. Quick disconnect for motor leads to cables. When something happens, how can we quickly get them? In fact, they're looking at that for your homes too. When you have a branch or a tree fall on your electrical lines, you know how your house goes out? Looking at quick releases for your homes, so that when that goes out, somebody just comes back up there, removes the tree, and plugs it back into your house. So this does have applications in other places than just nuclear. The last area I want to talk about is biomass and renewable. TVA is one of those fast followers. We were very involved in the early technology development. What I'm showing here is in Chattanooga. It's the largest installation of solar in the southeast. Oh, whoop-de-doo. It's 92 kilowatts, guys. And that's the largest in the southeast. Solar is expensive. This cost over a couple of $1 million, and that's the commercial rate. I mean, that's not an R&D rate. We've got 11 installations of them. We're trying very hard to create a demand in the valley so the economics get better as a higher production of photovoltaics is required. But we're trying, and this is part of our Green Power Switch program. The wind one is another one, which I think some of you probably have been up to the Buffalo Mountain over near Oak Ridge. There's 3 wind turbines. I laugh because any of you that traveled out west, or even to Sweden or Denmark or any of those other places, you see the huge wind farms, right? This is 3. It's the largest in the southeast. It's our wind garden, right? It's not a farm. It's our wind garden. But the interesting thing is this is what TVA does. Is wind a new technology? There's aspects of it that are new, but it's been around, evidenced by the wind farm. When we asked someone, request for proposal to ask to build wind in this area, we got a whopping zilcho. So TVA had to come up with the money. We decided to build 3, initiate a Green Power Switch program, which a market survey said that there were several different market groups that wanted it in these 7 states that TVA serves. We've now gone out and said it was such a whopping success, we want 20 megawatts. This is only about a little less than 2. 20 megawatts, 20 to 50. We got hundreds of proposals. So all of a sudden, TVA, by demonstrating it with 3, we now are bringing wind resources to the valley. Just an aside, it's hard to do in the southeast. You know these beautiful mountains that we like? Well, the wind is really nasty. It's updrafts and downdrafts and gusts, and I don't know about you, but I do get a little nervous standing next to those blades when they're going about 25 miles an hour going, okay, is it going up to 50? What's going to happen? Is it going to take off? And they do have brakes on them, by the way. 50 miles an hour, it stops totally, and flares the pitch out, so it's parallel. Okay. This area, I think, is something that we've just started in TVA over the past several years, and this is where I really like to see the technology move. TVA is a public power entity. If we haven't used it internally, or even if we have and you can use it externally with other companies, let's get it out there and get it commercialized. Green Power Switch is a prime example. We did a bunch of R&D in solar and wind and biomass, and it finally came to fruition with a program that is no longer run out of the Public Power Institute. It's run out of our marketing group. It's a commercial product. The biotrans transformer oil. Somebody happened to have an idea in Iowa. Couldn't get any attention. They happened to bring it to our attention. We realized that if we have all these PCB spills, that if you're actually using this soybean biotrans-based oil that has the same conductive powers as PCB, and it falls on the ground, it's not a hazardous material. So this has been something where we now have 4 distributors in the TVA area, not not one of them, but they're considering it, to put soy replacement for their PCB. This one was very timely. It's the ultraviolet irradiation germicide. It came out of the energy efficiency. How do we improve energy efficiency? And working with a company that was in Nashville, you know what they do? They cut up lettuce. They compete with Dole. You know all that cut up lettuce you buy in the store? Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to mix that up. That was the ozone. We'll go back. Let me go back. This ultraviolet one is the one we work with Memphis jail, and they were having trouble with tuberculosis, very high public transient areas, and so what we worked with them is they had filters, and filters, slow down the airflow. And this particular filter came up, it's an ultraviolet filter and kills spores. Where have you heard that before? It turns out that this is one of the solutions. Was never meant to be like that. None of us ever anticipated any kind of terrorist activity. But this particular germicide is now being used at the jail, several buildings in Memphis, hospitals around the southeast are installing and trying to further this particular technology. This is one where TVA helped develop it because it was energy efficient, saved energy, and it was environmentally sound. The other one, ozone food processing. Ozone's good or bad? It depends on where it is. Ozone closer to the earth, probably not good. The greenhouse gas warming effect. Ozone, in this particular case, O3, they use to wash the lettuce, and that's where I was going with that one. And this helped reduce the amount of energy, it helped reduce the amount of chemicals, such as environmental, and it supported a company that was here in the 7-state area called Strickland Produce. They won the #1 technology development in the food processing industry in the world a year and a half ago for this technology in which we were working with them at Epicry. And this uses O3 to wash the lettuce, not chlorine. Okay. I mentioned earlier about leveraging and diversifying of funds. You have to do that. You have to do that in your jobs. You'll have to if you stay in R&D. Colleges and universities are critical. That's where some of the neatest, unique ideas come from. And we want to help promote those, find an opportunity to look at them on a commercial scale and get them commercialized. Working with other public power partners that have that same dedication to public service for their R&D. Federal labs, you know all about. Vendors, who are actually the ones that would take something to market. I learned something at Caltech. They talk about, as a technology development person, you go, wow, I can just solve this problem. This is the problem. If I can just solve it, that'll be terrific. And then people just have to take my wonderful idea and go market it. But you know what? This is solving the technology problem, and this is taking it out there and marketing it and getting the infrastructure. Did I ever think when I was working at Bell Labs, who was going to man the 1-800 number for the product I was working on? I could care less. But that infrastructure is very important, and that's why we found that these vendors, having a vendor lined up at the beginning of an R&D project is turning out to be critical for us. Or it turns into one of those zombie projects, ones that just never, ever, ever, ever stop. We have several agreements with the University of Tennessee. These are some of them. They're all over. These are only our research partnerships, and they're not the ones that are pending. We have one right now that's in Congress with the switchgrass at Johnsonville, working with UT, that Zach Wamp is involved in. The forum publication it's probably almost over. It's been going on for years and years and years. It's an academic publication that picks a particular topic. The nuclear one, I think we've already talked about a little bit about the shield building vents and some general economicals. We don't have a lot of economists at TVA. So we use a lot of university support to do the economics related to investing in technology. So those are several of the things that we're doing, very broad, not much depth. And if you have any good ideas, we'd love to work with you, partner with you, if it's a nuclear or anything else that you think of on your spare time, because creative, smart people all have good ideas. But you can look up those websites. And thank you very much.
Angela will now entertain questions or comments. Questions?
You had a budget with dollar figures going up for several years, and the effort budget was steadily declining through that.
Why?
You probably have to be one of Epcori's largest.
We are the largest.
Okay. This really is going to hurt Epcor a lot. Why is that, and how is Epcor taking that? Is Epcor going to be a thing of the past?
Yes, no, yes, yes. A collaborative R&D organization in a competitive environment is very difficult. And as the industry deregulates, EPRI will become more targeted in the collaborative work they do. It's become a very important entity in those targeted areas. But things like looking at retail products, we're not going to do collaborative research with them where they're going to put money, they're going to take all of our money to collaborative retail products when that's with your competitors. Right now, we're not competitors. Nuclear will probably stay very strong because there are some requirements with safety-related research that we all have to share that. The transmission will stay very strong. They're started a new entity where they're making subsidiaries with different faces for international and public power entities that have a service mentality. Those will stay strong. Some of their other ones will fall off. Now, what they hope to see is that those other areas will go strong, we'll put our money there, but as their scope reduces, I imagine that our funding would reduce. It's a good question, very, very astute. Since I told you not to look at that part of the graph. Yeah.
Since electrons go down whatever wire's handy.
Path of least resistance, yep.
Right. The question in my mind is, let's say that I'm an environmentalist and I decide that I want to buy green power. Now, how do I know that those electrons that are coming into my house didn't come from that nasty coal-fired plant down here on the Clinch River?
You don't, and they don't, and we don't claim that they do, and that's a very good question. What we claim is that this much green power went onto the system, and we have an independent Price Waterhouse comes and actually does an audit. We're certified nationally, has to have a third party do an audit, and they're doing it right now, that says you didn't sell more than you actually generated. But green power going to your house doesn't go to your house, necessarily. That's a good question.
I have a follow-up question on, I got a brochure the other day from my local utility wanting me to buy blocks of green power. And they define green power as power that has minimal environmental impact. And they gave their examples as solar, wind, and biomass.
Nuclear.
That's my question, Peter. Why is it?
Good question. Why biomass?
Why? No.
Oh.
Why is it? I mean, I'm aware of solar and biomass and wind and the effects that they have on the environment. Okay, and it's non-trivial. And I'm also aware of what effects nuclear power has on the environment. Why is it, or maybe it is, and I'm just not knowledgeable. Why is it nuclear power considered to be green power by TVA? In my local utility? If it were, I might buy some.
You were at the public meetings, weren't you?
No.
What happened when TVA decided they would have a renewable product on Green Power Switch? They took all the different sources that could be considered green, and green primarily had to do with a reduction in NOx, SOx, and carbon dioxide emissions. Biomass does have carbon dioxide, I know that, but it was a reduction done. When we went out to 4,000 people were surveyed. We went out to multiple groups throughout 7 states, had at least 14 public meetings in addition to the 4,000 survey that were targeted towards people that actually might buy a renewable product. They ranked them solar and wind, and we don't want that stinking biomass, but if you got to have that to bring the cost down for solar and wind, we'll let you have it, but we're going to be real particular about what kind of biomass you can use. Nuclear, I'm sorry, and all the other ones that we consider renewable, other biomass thermal burns. And so it is a marketing product. It is not a technical decision. It's who will pay more and actually pull the wallet out, and it was people said, I'll buy wind and solar and some landfill, not even biomass, some landfill, marketing product. Now that's the Green Power Switch. What TVA's done is that we think renewable is this, and now we're going with the administration's definition of renewable, which nuclear is not included. And you have to know that having lived at Sequoia and Browns Ferry, I have at least 1,000 emails from my friends saying, you traitor! Don't you know that nuclear is green? And yes, it is technically, but it's not administratively or marketing-wise.
But it is renewable. You can go on ad infinitum with breeders use the uranium fuel cycle followed by the thorium fuel cycle. It'll go on forever.
Totally agree.
One suggestion might be to start putting, when I read the local newspaper makes it sound like that green is non-polluting and everything else is polluting, which is a bunch of crap. That's because most people don't understand what does and doesn't get admitted by the various forms of power production. It probably wouldn't hurt if the producers like yourself and stuff would let that be known. In other words, put out information for the local science editor or whatever to say, you know, when we burn this, this is the NOx and SOx and everything else that's produced. When we do nuclear, this is what's produced. And show that in fact it's zero, because there's a large segment of the population out there, because of the lack of information, that believes what the local newspaper will say when they say that there's green and then there's that nasty stuff.
And you.
Any idea what constitutes that?
That's absolutely true. In fact, I'm going to do 2 comments in there. We just finished a survey doing a market segment on who actually bought Green Power Switch. This is another survey, the last 6 months. 90% of the people surveyed said that the majority of power in TVA comes from the water. It's 11%. Mississippi has no Tennessee River. They said that 80% of their electricity came from hydro. I don't know where they're finding it. Now, I have to admit that TVA is not going, oh, no, we have that dirty, brown, polluting, belching fossil plant. Let's educate you. I admit we're not doing that. But to answer your other question, the one we are taking a leadership role on, and we're struggling with nuclear, is to come up with a TVA environmental footprint indicator. And that says, what's the life cycle cost for PVs? That includes all the volatile material to create a photovoltaic panel. What's the life cycle cost and impact on the environment for nuclear? What's the life cycle cost for fossil, for hydro, for storage? And show those in bar graphs. And believe me, when you have to do things in bar graphs, you lose a lot of detail. But that way we can say, just because you reduced your fossil emissions, did you do something else over here that increased your footprint? So I think that would be really interesting when we get that out. And they've asked the PPI people to do that. But you're right. Very good question.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments, Fran?
I noticed you thought the distributed generation talked about it in a negative tone in terms of the problems it was going to be. Does TVA think of it mostly as just something that's going to be a problem, or do they think that it could also help?
No, I apologize if I did that. I'm a distributed generation fan. It is going to be a market segment. It is going to grow. Is TVA going to be in the business of being a distributed generation provider? Probably not. And the reason is because we have to protect the system. Our resources are limited. We can't go out there, and there seems to be plenty of economic drivers to help people develop microturbines and fuel cells and little combustion turbines, button size, that kind of thing. So no, it's not bad, but the interconnection standards aren't developed. Anything that burns on natural gas is not non-polluting, and so those are the only things.
So I guess you're viewing it really more as a competitor.
As a technology that we have to develop the infrastructure to support it. I mean, if you put your Toyota generator on there in your house, but you want to back it up, then you're going to have to line the phases up. That means a whole other meter transformer for you that you didn't plan to buy with that $2,000 Toyota generator. So, and we want to protect our linemen. So we're focusing more now on the infrastructure. Electric vehicles. We were used to be in electric vehicles. We're not now. We're focusing on the infrastructure. How are you going to plug an electric vehicle into your house, not the vehicle itself? So maybe that's a better analogy. Good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we do have a few visitors, guests today that you probably don't know that we have refreshments downstairs on the second floor, and everyone is invited. But before we adjourn for refreshments, let's express our appreciation again to Andy. Thank you. Give me probably a little part on it. Too much.
Oh, well, they had good questions. Very perceptive.
And you didn't even need